Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, we're going to hopefully settle a bit of a debate that's going on about the upcoming change for Chinese in the next patch, which happens to also set us up nicely to do a bit of a deep dive into the Chinese unusual start from having extra villagers. Before we get into it though, I think we should set up with a bit of context, as to understand the change, it helps to first understand the problem it's trying to address. If you didn't already know, there's something a little odd going on with the Chinese, where at high ELO ratings, especially 2000 ELO and up, performance-wise they're doing exceptionally well. But as you go down in ELO, they drop sharply to being among the bottom 5 for average players, and one of the very worst civs for players under 800 ELO. You could argue over the importance of win rates below 1000 ELO, and whether it's okay to have a civilization that just tanks at lower levels. I think reasonable people could argue in good faith for either side of that debate. Instead, we're going to talk about what this change does, and whether it actually makes Chinese easier to play at lower levels, as many people suggest, or whether the upcoming change could be described as a straight nerf or a straight buff. The proposed change coming is that instead of beginning with 6 villagers and no starting food, they'll start with 5 villagers and 50 starting food, so you can immediately queue a villager, making things feel more standard. To start with, we need a baseline for comparison, so let's break down how a start with Chinese typically works at the moment. All of these tests are going to be with a pretty ideal setup, with a sheep immediately going to the town center from a usual distance, one villager makes a house right away, and I pick up loom, with the rest of the villagers going on sheep. To give a benchmark for a typical civilization with 0 idle time at the town center, their 10th villager should be coming out at 2 minutes and 55 seconds. Obviously, Chinese start with extra villagers, so they should reach the 10th villager faster, but how much faster? Well, that's the thing with Chinese, it kind of depends on your skill level. In this first test, I'm not going to be doing any forced dropping off, where I make the villagers put their food into the town center at opportune moments, and instead I'm just waiting to queue villagers until I hit 50 food. Immediately after putting down a house and queuing up loom, the remaining villagers start taking sheep at 11 seconds, and you can't reasonably start sooner than that. Loom is done somewhere around 30 seconds, and I don't have the food yet for a villager, which is totally normal, and that comes in for me sometime around 42 seconds. That first villager I queue goes to sheep to help maintain villager production, which is pretty standard to keep things running smoothly. In this case, I can't queue the next villager until a minute and a half, but eventually food starts to be banked and things get a lot easier, which is the point of having 7 villagers on sheep. After the next 3 go to wood, note that villager number 10 comes out at 2 minutes and 47 seconds. Compared to a regular civilization getting the same 10th villager at 2:55, I'm not only a little faster as Chinese, but I also have loom. So what this means is that without force dropping off, I can still be basically 1 villager up once my opponent gets loom, ending a bit better off for my trouble. Of course, keep in mind this is me intentionally not dropping off food though. And what if we add force dropping off to keep the town center working as much as possible? I'm not saying force dropping off is an incredibly advanced thing, but just as something that higher skill players will be more comfortable and consistent about doing. Trying the test a second time after the same start and the first villager queued up at 42 seconds, I can basically keep the town center working constantly, force dropping off basically just as or a little before each villager. Where last time it took almost 3 minutes to hit 10 villagers, in this case I can reach the 10th villager in 2 minutes and 23 seconds. That means with a bit more attention and force dropping off, I can be about 1 villager ahead of a generic civilization through most of Dark Age, plus 2 villagers up once my opponent gets loom, hence the roughly 2 villager advantage that people talk about with the Chinese bonus. This is at least part of why this bonus pays off differently at various skill levels, and obviously faster players are more likely to get the sheep under the town center quicker, and this isn't to say that you're automatically 2 villagers up if you know how to force drop off. It's just a necessary component and highlights how a few more actions per minute and experience can translate into a villager lead for Chinese in particular. Of course, in reality, at very low levels, it can be much more messy than we're talking about here, where players don't know to get loom first, they build a lot of unnecessary houses, or they kill sheep too early in a panic to get villagers working. This can easily turn into being several villagers behind if you have significant town center idle time. So that's the baseline reflecting the status quo, and now let's see how things change with the new bonus coming for the next patch, losing a villager but gaining 50 food. Right away, one big difference is you don't have to make a house, given you have 1 extra population cap to work with and can instead just put all 5 villagers on sheep. Instead, the 7th villager can build the house and then go back to sheep, which I found works a little better. Immediately on the new patch, I can queue up a villager, and when that's done, I don't have the food for the next. So rather than a bunch of idle time at the town center, I can just pick up loom. What's nice about the new patch is that by the time I finish loom, I don't even have to force drop off to queue up the next villager, and it actually feels really smooth. The only adjustment I have to make is to remember to build a house with the 7th villager and then put it back on sheep. Speeding ahead, I end up creating my 10th villager at 2.5 minutes, which is the ideal without idle time. That puts me exactly 1 villager ahead of a regular civilization, plus I have loom, maintaining my 2 villager advantage on the new patch. For someone playing near perfect, that means this change translates into being maybe a couple of seconds behind and missing just a handful of resources. You basically have to force drop off for every villager to keep 0 idle time, but I wouldn't really say this is a significant nerf if things go smoothly. But of course, what if we aren't force dropping off, which would be more common at lower levels or on a controller where your actions per minute are more limited? The real question is whether those players are in a better position after this change, as many have suggested. The argument goes that this is closer to a standard start, so this is going to help low elo players, and this might be a positive change for them. And remember, anything we can do to help them out while bringing down high elo players would address the odd Chinese win rate problem. Well, I tried it out, and queuing up a villager every time as soon as I was able to without any force dropping off, the 10th villager came out at 2 minutes and 44 seconds if I skip the first house. Even if I built the first house though and didn't force drop off, I got a very similar 2 minutes and 48 seconds, so I don't think the timing of the house actually matters that much. Remember, previously with 6 starting villagers, the 10th one came out at 2:47. So again, basically it's identical. Functionally speaking, if you're not force dropping off, again, this change seems to have virtually no impact on your number of villagers and leads to at most a difference of maybe 10 food at the end of Dark Age. Now, I have to admit, none of this surprised me. The easiest way to think about it is that the new change is functionally the same thing as having a villager under your town center stand in place for the first 25 seconds. Instead of getting all 6 villagers at once and no food left over, you get 5 of your villagers and then number 6 arrives 25 seconds later. After getting loom, you're basically in the exact same spot on the new patch as you were before. This is why I initially had a hard time accepting the idea that this was somehow better for beginners or made the Chinese start easier. I don't think anyone would argue that idling 1 villager for 25 seconds to begin the game makes your start easier, you just collect fewer resources. I think why it might feel intuitively like it's easier at lower levels is it means less town center idle time, as now the town center can work constantly. But really this change is just giving your town center previously unnecessary work to make the 6th villager, where it was previously handed to you. So ultimately, will this be less messy for low-rated players? Personally, I don't see why having 2 villagers under the town center instead of 3 would change the psychology that much. But you never know, and I have to admit it does feel smoother to queue villagers immediately after loom, and there's less pressure on when you build the first house. If anything, I guess the conclusion from trying it out is that this isn't really a big deal either way. Psychologically, if you think this makes their start feel easier, then that's great. Or if you're against the change, then rest assured the net effect is almost nothing. That'll do it for this one though, and at least hopefully that was a nice refresher of how to start the game with Chinese and also puts the change into perspective. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.